right. Thank you for being here. Henry Wong, writer, designer, creative director, and more. What is the goal of a creative director?
Goal of a creative director, it's really to guide ideas and hopefully inspire the team to come up with something that is unique in the marketplace that can, really be help a brand or a person stand out in the marketplace. So it's a very all-encompassing title, but one I've enjoyed for the last 25 years.
What do you think that the origin of creativity is? Or where do you think
Uh,
it comes from?
I think from the very days of our caveman roots, really, when someone decided to take a little bit of fruit color and began trying to communicate on a cave wall, and interpreting it from there on.
Do you see creativity as something we manifest ourselves or that we kind of channel through from somewhere else?
We're very much creative human beings. So, in spite of the many roles that we play in day-to-day life, whether it's an accountant or a lawyer or things that are typically not thought of being creative, we, as a human being, are looking for ways to create, whether it's life or whether it's art or simply, some woodworking. There's something about us as beings that are looking to express ourselves. So, in some ways, people use that as a way to make a living. Others do it simply as a hobby, but definitely we're all wired for some form of creativity.
Why do you think that some people seem more in tuned with it or more creative than others?
I think just the opportunity to explore it. I think if you think back on the work, any early artists, whether they're a writer or a fine artist, their first bit of work has always been as crappy as you can imagine. They openly admit it, but unlike the rest of us, perhaps they've focused on it, got training along the way, been able to enhance those skills and developed it further. And I think all of us have that ability. It's just really, how much time or emphasis do you want to put towards it to improve your craft?
So when you decided to write a book, what were the first considerations you thought about?
Well, I think that part certainly was interesting because we're writing a book. It does have a certain amount of creativity in terms of being able to express yourself. At the same time, there's the other side of the brain come into play, which is a discipline towards it, which is really mapping out all the chapters, being very structured every week in terms of how I would go about putting pen to paper or fingers to keyboard to bring it all to life.
How'd you do your schedule then? Were you looking for like daily goals of covering a topic or a word count or a time for writing? How'd you set your schedule up?
Yeah, I think, like everybody else, I have the demands of a work day and I have clients that I manage during the week. So every Saturday morning became my time to write. I sit down for a number of hours and go as far as I can within that time. And that became a thing for close to a year before the book was finished. So I think following that discipline really helped me because the other way, and you often hear this from people who write or create, is that I need to wait to be inspired. I need to try to write when I'm motivated to. And sometimes if you wait too long, nothing begins happening. So I did find a certain amount of discipline is required to be able to do it. And sometimes it's very productive and sometimes it's not at all. But the idea of setting aside the time, the idea of putting, those efforts to make it happen certainly caused it to come to completion as opposed to just waiting for it to happen.
When you're just out in the world or working or doing other things, not sitting down, engaging in writing, do you have thoughts that occur and do you write them down then, or how do you keep track of that?
I used to keep a little notepad beside my bed, and inevitably this happens to a lot of people. You wake up from a dream and you got these great ideas, or in the middle of the night you have these great ideas, and you have to write it down because you know that by the time you wake up, you will probably forget it. But I find that was often difficult because my writing was often like chicken scratching. I'd look at it in the morning and go, oh my goodness, what did I write here? So the great thing, most of us have phones, and just a simple dictation of that idea really helps. I'm working on another book right now, and it's been super helpful as I come across or be inspired by ideas. I simply have this doc that I can do a dictation into, and it transcribes it. Sometimes it does it accurately, sometimes it doesn't. But more importantly, I've captured the thought that I can shape later. But that whole process of being able to dictate it or say it or speak it into a device makes a huge difference.
How do you keep track of all that, whether it's written memos or voice memos, and how
Oh,
do
I
you
can't.
arrange that?
I can't at this. So right now, it's a whole bunch of random thoughts right now, but I know eventually it'll be organized into set chapters. So from a writing process, if you're interested in that, I've mapped out an entire structure for the next book, which will be, likely, about 24 to 30 chapters, each with a theme to it. So the parts that I capture through dictation will find its way into a larger story. So they're really just building blocks like anything. And I do see it very much like constructing a house. So I learned a lot with the first book is just to, when you have the basic foundation, it becomes easier and easier to add on to it. And once you have a structure and sort of that footprint that you're working with, it becomes easier to be able to stay within that, of course.
Have you been a part of, or did you use like a writing group when you were before when you started writing, or even now? Do you attend or take part in a writing group?
I don't, but in my early days, I was super fortunate to be a published writer, as a magazine writer, and as a literary writer. The writing I've done recently is a little bit more business-like, of course, but through the years, that's really been my task as a creative person, as a copywriter in advertising. It becomes really my mainstay. So writing as a discipline really hasn't been that difficult for me. And I think the other side of it is, and I know groups can be very helpful for a lot of people because it forces you to deliver on a weekly or bi-weekly basis, and forces you to share things with people. I kind of, maybe it's part ego, maybe it's just part the way I look at things. That I really, it's really my own thought that matters more than anything. And if I were to share any sort of advice with people, it's very easy to get discouraged in this whole creative process, as you can imagine. And you'll have people who will support you and people who will be naysayers. Ultimately, it still comes back to you. What do you think? What do you want to create that will, get on canvas or get on paper?
Is writing copy then different than writing Saturday morning for yourself? Where different between writing on assignment? Do you think it is creatively, is it coming from the same place, or is it different?
I think it does, because there is still that creative heart to it. So even within the world of advertising, you're coming up with interesting creative solutions to a business problem. So in many ways, writing is a sort of solutions-based way of going at it. What I do have when I'm writing for myself is I'm unencumbered by, let's say, a brief or the confines of what the requirements are. But at the same time, I do find that with the many people, many creative people I've worked with over the years, they seem to work quite well when there are restrictions. And I think that's where often the creativity comes in, when you're tasked with something that has a little bit of a set of boundaries. You find creative solutions to it. If you're left to your own devices, it sometimes can take on a form that isn't disciplined, that doesn't follow what it should. But having those confines makes a big difference in terms of creativity, I find.
That's a good point. Do you have somebody that when you're writing your books, that when you get to whatever point you have a draft where you're willing to let somebody else look at it? Do you have somebody that reads it just to see if it's making sense, if it's tracking, if there's any big errors that you just missed?
But there are always copy editors and not available. And the fortunate part with my last book is that an actual publisher did see merit in it and was able to support it. So they supplied the editor, they supplied the input with it, and that was a Business Expert Press, terrific people out of New York. But for myself, I have to admit, I'm probably my own worst critic. So leaving something aside and coming back to it, I find I have that ability now to write and rewrite and redo things because it's just I need to tweak it. I need to make it right. I think that came from the multiple years in advertising, which you're often left to try to work within a 30-second commercial and try to get it right and try to get the idea honed and fine-tuned until it hopefully as good as it can be.
What kind of writing setup do you have at home when you're writing versus when you're at work writing? Or is it all the same place?
It's kind of the same. I think we live a life of have laptop will travel. So I'd like to think I can pick up anywhere and travel anywhere. I mean, earlier before the show, we talked about our mutual desire just to be on the road, and there's something quite inspiring about that. But I think more importantly than having a area in which you can write, there's two parts I've found really, really helpful, and that is the ability to pace, to walk around, to kind of look out the window, kind of be like a cat staring out in the world and picking up things. But I do find getting out in the world really more inspiring than staying behind a desk and a computer because you observe things, you see things, you kind of interact, and being able to bring all of that is much easier to the process than trying to make things up, I find. The common refrain is that you should write what you know, and I think the best answer to that is just experience as much as you can because then you know more and you can write more and you can create more as a result.
It makes me think about the movie Stranger Than Fiction and then the show Mad Men, which is
Hmm.
more advertising stuff. When you are out in the world, do you find that if you're familiar with that show and the movie, do you find that that rings true with how ideas occur when you're out there and you're thinking about uh, a advertising campaign or something, and you're just putting together those thoughts?
Yeah, very much so. And you quoted two of my, one of my favorite films and one of my all-time favorite TV shows. So yeah, right on in terms of that. And I think they do a wonderful job of capturing it, but I do think it's a little bit different for everybody. My own thought is that stimulation makes a world of difference in terms of being able to manifest something. So the least amount of stimulation you have, I think the least amount of output that you have. So there's something powerful about interacting out there with the world and being able to just hold it in your memory, in your experience, and being able to draw from it. The wonderful thing about Mad Men is very applicable to a lot of the work I've done over the years, and which is really creative solutions to trying to sell a product or creative solutions to a set of parameters that I refer to. So the creativity really comes in finding a unique way of presenting that no one has seen before. And I think they captured it really well. My understanding is that they had employed an actual advertising professional for the show to come up with the campaigns and come up with some of the processes, and that's it was from particularly of that time period. It was pretty dead on from what I understand.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. It's toasted. It's toasted. I like the idea of reframing things. And I think it helps that
Hmm.
brings, if you have that advertising mind of it, then when you're writing a book about anything else, it helps you look at it from a different perspective that
Very.
may be a little more exciting than what's been out there before.
Yeah, very, very much so. I mean, what you had quoted, I guess we're both Mad Men fans. Yeah. So what you quoted was, I think, that scene where Don Draper is pitching the way to position the cigarettes, and
Mhm.
that in itself is a really great insight into creativity because what you're often trying to do if you're selling a product creatively is to find that unique selling proposition or that unique positioning that that product can have in the marketplace. So if everybody's going one way, the creative side of you will tell you, well, how can I go another way, or how can I present this differently that might get people to pay attention or to position or sell the product in a very unique fashion.
Yeah. It's all about understanding the perspectives. In policing, I found when you're questioning someone
Hmm.
that one of the things can't remember the exact I don't think it was the read technique or substitution or something like that, where if somebody you suspect has committed a crime, then you want to offer an alternative reason for them to have done it. And you just kind of go through your storytelling from what you think their perspective is. I mean, some people are better at it than others, but you can just like put the reasoning in, why they did this certain thing, what their motivations were, and it sells the story more to where they'll agree with it. I don't think
Mhm.
you're talking them into it. You're getting them to admit what they
Yeah,
did.
or open up so they begin, I guess that you as maybe the investigator are looking for where there are inconsistencies in the
Mm.
story and whether they're, true to their initial narrative or not. Yeah, that's a
Yeah.
fascinating approach.
You can tell by their expression if you got it right or if you got it wrong, because usually if you get it wrong, they'll correct you and say, no, 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 I didn't do it like that. I did it like this, you know?
Hmm. Yeah.
So, and then just over the years, you hear different stories from different people, and the elements of crime are often similar. So it's the tropes of criminal
Yeah.
activity.
What you default to. So
Yeah,
maybe the lesson for listeners out there who are investigated is maybe to say nothing.
definitely say nothing. Then, but that also says something in itself.
Hmm.
It's hard to
Yeah.
say nothing when somebody starts presenting a story to you, because that's what you would do, is
You
say,
react. Yeah.
don't talk about it right now. Let me just paint a picture. You got up this morning, you were a little hungry, and you didn't have the money, so you decided to borrow it from somewhere else. It starts off as borrowing, starts
Yeah.
off
So
as you're going to pay
yeah.
it back,
So
and ends
of
up
course,
with
my
years of
reaction,
investment.
if you were doing that to me, you go, no, 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 that didn't happen. Okay. So then now you have me. What did happen exactly?
Yeah, yeah, it's interesting. Hmm.
Yeah, so much of psychology comes into play, doesn't it? Whether you're creating a story or just in our day-to-day life of observing people, it's such a fascinating thing, human behavior, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it's all about capturing attention too, because whether it's an ad campaign or you're trying to get somebody to read a book or anything, look at a picture, whatever, you're trying to capture that attention. So
Hmm.
how are you going to do that? So in the world of advertising, then, is that something you're still doing these days?
Yeah, when I first started in the business, it was fairly easy to, be successful and make a living at it. And it's not that I'm not successful, but I just think back on what I do now versus what I did then. So back then, we could simply come up with a TV ad and maybe an occasional outdoor billboard or a magazine ad, and the rest of the time so that you have your campaign. The rest of the time you go celebrate and hit the bars and sort of enjoy life a little, sort of the post Madman era. But these days, our audience is so fragmented and so complex that you have to be an expert in storytelling across the board, everything from, traditional TV ads, video, social media, direct mail, email, experiential, on and on and on. And creating a campaign isn't simply the one idea, but taking that one idea and seeing how you might be able to transcribe it across all these media platforms. So that in that way, it's become much more complex, but it also makes you realize how much the public interacts with your message on different levels, and it's not everything you think it is. And each of us have our own favorites that we default to. So being able to find the right media to connect with people is really part of that creativity as well.
Do you think that that creative source, whatever it is that people are drawn to, whether they like books or poetry or songs or paintings, photography, do you think that creative source is segmented off that way as well? Like it has a muse for poetry, a muse for writing, a muse for photography?
I think if we think of all the different types of media forms we consume or the things that we enjoy, I mean, you probably watch things that are entirely different than me and someone who may be in a younger demographic or older one will consume things differently. And partly it's based on their background in that, but we often have common things that we do enjoy. But really, when I think about it, we're more controlled by an algorithm these days than we are by our own interests. So I often compare with my son what things he's consuming on the type of content. None of the stuff that he talks about ever shows up on my feed because once I embark on a certain type of content, let's say on YouTube, it wants me to keep watching that because it obviously is looking for a way to sustain my interest. So it'll keep serving up that sort of content. And I think that that is very true across all the streaming platforms, all the different sort of social media. You get connected with the algorithm and you're trying to um, find things that are of interest to you. So as an advertiser, as a person creating for that medium, what do I create for? The audience that I'm ultimately trying to sell to, or the algorithm that hopefully will present it to the people that I need to do it. So before we would find creative and human ways of connecting with people through the story, through the messaging, even the clever headlines or the type of commercials. Nowadays, I am finding that we're trying to game a little bit of the algorithm. What are the key words? What are the sort of messaging and things that might be picked up by Google? So our campaigns are really quite interesting, is that we end up creating at times let's say in the vicinity of 15 or 25 different headlines, which you upload, and then Google will serve that up to the people that who connect better with those keywords and so forth, and they'll keep doing it. So in many ways, we're we're steering ourselves partly to the audience, but partly as well to this algorithm and this form of intelligence, which will determine what is created for people.
How much of the AI type segment are you using in advertising these days?
I think a lot of the planning, a lot of the management is still AI. I do find the actual creative portion of it, being able to write or even creating. We've experimented with images, things like Midjourney and other sort of photo related AI, but it just doesn't have that human touch yet. And I assume it will come at some point. But I am, as a agency, as a group of people working towards this, we're very focused on seeing where this can potentially take us. But I do think it's a valuable tool in a lot of the structured sort of job requirements. But in terms of creativity, I think we're a way before someone can use artificial intelligence to be able to tell us something unique and touching and human. There's something about us as human beings being able to connect with each other on that level that so far AI has not been able to capture whatsoever.
Do you do any other writing that's not the advertising or your book writing? Do you have any other creative outlets that you do?
You
Painting,
know,
anything else?
yeah, yeah. I've dabbled in a little bit of music and a little bit of art, but I have to admit I'm very poor at it. I think there's a lot of creativity in just mechanical work. So, working on cars, working on the motorcycle, I find that there's something just trying to come up with an interesting solution to sometimes what is a problem is a form of creativity. Woodworking, things like that. It's just again an expression of yourself, and to me, creativity is just expressing yourself. Oh, but I will add, I mean, I grew up doing a lot of different martial arts over the years, and I realize that is a form of human expression as well, the way you may interact with different techniques and so forth. So, again, it goes back to perhaps my theory that each of us have some form of creativity that we're looking to just simply manifest in the best possible way.
Yeah, my working definition of art is creativity made manifest. Just trying to
Mhm.
explain it simply. I think that's what I'm going with for right now.
Yeah. How about yourself? What do you get into that might be termed a little bit more creative?
I can see the draw of painting and drawing, and I'm not that good at it, and I'm not that serious about it, so I'm not devoting a lot of time to it, but I do find more often now that I visualize concepts more than I used to. And that's
Hmm.
interesting to me. So that, and then screenwriting is interesting because I think it makes my prose writing better. And poetry, I've been going in with for the last few years, like devoting maybe most of my time to poetry. And I think that makes dialogue better in book writing. And I think now I'm coming back around to getting to where I'm going to write books again rather than poetry the most. So it's
Yeah.
interesting to see how creativity just works its way through life.
I think you're absolutely right. There's something about, even that discipline of poetry writing that helps in all other forms. You're creating a bit of a rhythm. There's a little bit of a structure, understanding how words interact and how it matters. Even it's a simple cadence of, day-to-day writing or prose writing is often improved because one of the best compliments I've ever had is just somebody was able to pick up on the rhythm of the sentence structure. And
Mm.
they were going dot, 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 dot. Oh, you got a nice rhythm going here in the way the words are structured. And I thought, oh, great.
The first time I noticed that in my adult life, because of course you in nursery rhymes and Dr. Seuss and things, you can see it. If you're reading song lyrics, you see it.
Hmm.
But
Yeah.
reading Moby Dick, it's not through the whole thing for me, but there are parts of it where I didn't expect to find lyricism, and then you find yourself in it. And I was like, wow, is this? And then I wondered, is the whole thing like this? And I just missed it. So I would go back and read other chapters, and it's not the same in all of them for me. So maybe I'm reading it wrong, or
Or maybe
maybe
it
it
was the technique he
strikes in
deployed.
parts.
Perhaps it was the technique that Herman Melville employed at the time, to elicit a certain feeling from you. So all of
Mm.
that is just, I guess, tools that we can draw from.
Do you find you talked a little bit about it before, as far as
Mhm.
the walking around and looking at things? Do you find any specific things you do that help or bring out that creativity more than others? Like if I'm running, I think more. If I'm in the shower, if I'm swimming, it has a lot to do with water, I think, for me.
Oh,
But what do you think? Any
and,
other times where you find creativity is more potent, I guess?
yeah, and I think you've hit on something because often many become frustrated because they're forcing themselves to be creative. And I think the best creativity comes when you're not trying. So anytime I'm doing something physical, whether it's working out or working on the bike or just simply meandering about, I find allows my mind to steady enough to be able to just have different things come in. It's just that bit of association that you see on things. But I believe there's always a story inherent in almost everything and every person. So that sort of ability just to connect with people and hear different thoughts, whether you agree with it or not, or whether you're interested or not, does create a bit of a spark. And I think that's where a lot of my, perhaps creativity comes from in just interacting with the world in some way, but not forcing it to happen. So something interacting in some physical way, so your mind is a little bit more at ease and allows maybe those thoughts to begin free flowing a little bit better.
Yeah, I wonder if it's got to get past that veneer of existing as a human, where you have to worry about survival and, you know, yeah, survival, basically your well-being, what you're going to
Ah,
eat, where you're going to be.
yeah, Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Hierarchy.
Yeah, do we need to satisfy that first? It's an interesting question because you often read about, people, writers who live in, uh, squalor, but all they want to do is just write because they're so driven by it. So I think, Yeah, I don't know. I can only speak to certainly myself. Even when I was a struggling student back years ago, yeah, there was always this desire to want to write or to produce in some way. So I think we find it, and sometimes it's blocked along the way. And maybe the goal is to have each of us free ourselves from it. So whether it's by creating a situation, whether it's financially or just mentally, to be able to get into that space is often needed to build something together.
With your martial arts stuff, what which disciplines have you tried, and which do you think is best for just the relaxation and versus actual use?
Oh, interesting question. So, my background is Chinese, so there's a natural disposition towards the Chinese martial arts, the kung fu's of the world, and that's often handed down from generation to generation. So that's really what I began with. As I began entering and interacting with people, it was, I guess, a very open sort of engagement. So I began picking up other martial arts like taekwondo and boxing, and then fencing and some of the other Japanese martial arts, and then getting into Philippine stick fighting and so forth. All of them are great in their own way. They're wonderful expressions of art. And really, martial arts is so encompassing because it can be deployed for entertainment, it can be deployed for sport, for exercise and stilling the mind, for other things as well, that spiritual journey. So I think anything that all of them really lead to that higher ascendancy in itself. Karate, kung fu, each of them have a component of stilling the mind, and that's where I began finding that I began tapping into the more grander philosophy that came with it. That stillness of mind, keeping it calm for in a stressful situation, whether it's a fight situation or simply day-to-day life, allowed that spirituality portion of it to enter, because we realize that we're much more connected to each other and to the universe than perhaps leads on. But it really begins with controlling your physical side. And I think that was really the purpose of it in the beginning. So when you can control your stress level, or you're excited, being able to calm it down just simply by concentrating on it leads to a bigger connection with what is between your ears, and ultimately, hopefully, a grander look at life and spirituality.
Nice. I started off with taekwondo in college
Oh, wonderful.
as an elective,
Uh-huh.
and that was okay. A lot of kicking, a lot of stretching. The
Great physical exercise. Yeah.
Yep, yep,
Yeah.
that was good. And then watching like it was Silky Sun done, so it was Master of 10, which
Hmm.
is a I'm not sure his heritage. We'll call him American. He was a shorter guy, and just saw him kicking one day when we were warming up for class, and he could kick so high. I was just really impressed by that, about how tall his height versus how high he could kick. And
Hmm.
then life goes on. And then I did like police martial arts type stuff, just defensive tactics, and then Marine defensive tactics, which started as line training when I was in, and
Oh,
then
yeah.
ended in Marine martial arts, which everything ends with stomping on a person's face. So
Yeah.
that you can't really use in the club, I mean, you
Hmm.
could use it in the club, but you're going to get in trouble. So maybe don't go to the club. Then later on, Aikido, because I was looking for something that had that spiritual connection, but also was not going to, what's the friendliest to the opponent? What's going to help them the most? What's
Hmm.
maybe the easiest to get out of whatever situation you're in? And then I realized 6 months or a year into Aikido that it was basically a dance, and started with jujitsu. And I wish I had have found jujitsu when I was a kid, because
Hmm.
I think it's tougher to start on that when you're older. Maybe. I mean, you lose a lot when
Yeah.
you're
Your
rolling.
rolling and
Yeah,
flexibility and things. Yeah.
that's all you're doing is losing. You're getting choked by people that half your size and much younger than you. Like I could be in a jujitsu training with a kid that knows a little bit about it, and they're going to destroy me. So that was humbling, and it made you think, which is the stuff I had thought about from the Marine stuff and the police stuff too, which was if you can avoid being in a fight, that's the best thing. But
Yeah.
then the more you learn those martial arts, if you're looking at it for the combat side of it, the more you realize anybody can lose on any day. So maybe it's best to avoid the fights.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, some of the best fighters, even within the professional ring, have off days or just aren't suited for that particular type of fighter. And you never assume. And the beauty of martial arts, as I'm sure you've found, is getting to a level where you simply avoid those confrontations or find that there are other solutions other than to engage physically. And yeah, I can't remember the last fight or physical altercation I've been in because I've been able to simply avoid it by, finding another solution. If I was pushed to it, yeah, I would absolutely defend myself and my family. But at the same time, if it doesn't have to happen, it shouldn't. And we see it's really quite remarkable, because we come from all different shapes and sizes. And your example is just so telling that, the person who you think may be an easy pushover may, in fact, could probably take you out quite easily without, you realizing it. So you never know what you're walking into. And then there's the whole legal side of it, of course. So maybe if everybody began thinking through in this sort of logical sense, we'd have a little bit less conflict. But who knows? There's no easy solution to what we're faced with in life.
It's a strange mix of confidence and proficiency
Hmm.
because it does make you more confident, but it also shows you that you can be anybody could get lucky, but you could also be hurt really quick. So it's it's a strange thing. I think that's how you
Yeah.
tell when you go into a martial arts place or talk to a fighter. Maybe a professional fighter probably feels the same way, but it might be different because you're going into a thing knowing you're going to fight. But when you, for me, going to any of the combat sports schools and listening to the instructor or the person that's running the school, their philosophy on it,
Hmm.
I think is the decider for whether you're going to get involved with it or not. I mean, if you go
Yeah.
in and it's like the guy from the Karate Kid, which is like you win whatever
At
you
all
do,
costs. Yeah.
yeah, versus someone else that's like, look, you want to avoid the situation. If you get in it, this is the thing to do to get out of it. And
Hmm.
then like, okay, I can appreciate that a little better. And
Yeah.
a lot of the jujitsu school I went to was he was a tournament jujitsu guy, but he was also a police officer. And I think that helped a lot because I liked his philosophy on policing, which was the minimum amount of force necessary. I agree with that. And it came across in his teaching. It didn't mean it was any less effective. It just meant that's your state of mind going into it.
Yeah, I think that's very telling in terms of being able to connect with it. And I mean, our discussion is on art, of course, and it is super fascinating. Don't you find that each of these martial arts are also interpreted by an instructor or by the martial artist? So there's variations of it, and I think that's what makes it so fascinating. That the way you can express yourself even within combat, and it can be so creative. Even strategy, if you look at war and the way people engage on that side, you study the great battles and how creative some of the ideas were that won key skirmishes.
Yeah, I think you could probably do parallels between battles and advertising,
Yeah,
just different ways of dealing with a problem that you've seen in the past and how to deal with it before it occurs
yeah,
or how to
yeah.
counter it. Yeah.
And I've often used that analogy of battle or war in that because many people think a strategy is simply your objective of what you're trying to do. No, strategy is your how. It's like what is it that you're doing uniquely that may be able to win the battle, whether it's in the marketplace or in life in general. That's a strategy, your the way that you go about it.
It's good. What kind of bike are you riding these days?
I have a Ducati Monster. How about yourself?
I moved into a neighborhood a couple of years ago that did not allow motorcycles. I did not
Okay.
know that this actually occurred in America, and I
Oh.
didn't know about it until we had already put an offer in on the house. I'm not sure if that would have changed
Hmm.
whether whether we moved in or not, but I don't know. No way to
That's
tell. But
interesting.
the last bike I had was just a V-Strom 650, the Suzuki. I think
Yeah.
Suzuki is my brand. I like
Hmm.
that one. All right. And then for work, when I was policing, we had the Harleys, of course. The Electric
Yes.
Glide is what we were riding.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's always fun to have a reason to ride, not just to get on the bike and go in a circle on the interstate and then come back. But if
Yeah.
you have a destination or a
Yeah.
trip or a
Well,
purpose,
well, we
it was
talked
better.
about the freedom, but there is something about putting. So here where I live, we have to have a helmet. But there is something. Even though I've talked about how freeing it is to be in your state of Florida to ride without a helmet, there is something about putting on the helmet, and it kind of blocks everything out, and you're really alone with your thoughts. And now that we're talking about it, I realize that it's also a wonderful tool for creativity to be able to kind of shut yourself off a little bit from the world and be alone with your thoughts and seeing where that goes.
Yeah, that's a good point. So you just got to sit in the recliner after this with the helmet on and just see what happens.
Yeah, that's right. Some sort of sensory deprivation.
Yeah. The the vehicle I have now is a Jeep, a Wrangler. So no doors, things like that. It's kind of the advantages of the motorcycle because you're out there with nature. You're feeling that heat. If it's
Hmm.
105 outside, you know it. If it's raining, you're going to get wet. But you can maybe when I was younger and had a Jeep, I didn't have the top on, so you had the sun and all that. But
Yeah.
round about mid 30s is when you start to think, well, maybe I just keep the top on just to keep the sun off of me, when the sun's out, just as a little cooler. And now I have the soft top with just the soft top on it, like the cover on the top, no
Hmm.
doors, no windows. And that's pretty good. That's pretty close to a motorcycle. You don't have the leaning, but you have the communing with nature and
Yeah. Feeling the
the free.
true air. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no helmet. You're probably going to get destroyed if you wreck. So you
Yeah.
got those
Very
fears
much.
all built in. Hmm. What is the best way for people to follow your work and to get copies of your books?
I think if you go to my website, henrywong.co, that'll lead you to a bit about my book and certainly a way to contact me. I'm always very open to connecting with people, and I really enjoy it because you never know where that can lead once you connect with people.
Hmm. Okay.
But books is available on most retailers through whether it's Walmart, Amazon, Target, and so forth. But it's listed on my website. So yeah, thank you for asking that.
Okay. I know you have a time restraint. Any thoughts in closing or things you wanted to talk about that we didn't?
I really enjoyed this conversation because it didn't necessarily focus on aspects of the book, and I know our discussion is certainly around creativity and really digging into that. So I'd like to go back to what we talked about earlier, and I believe every one of us have this ability to be creative. We just need to find the opportunity to bring it out, and I would highly encourage everyone to be able to do that because it's just a wonderful amount of satisfaction in being able to do something like that to create.
I agree. Your links for your website, and I think I have a couple other links for you too, will be in
Mhm.
the show notes for people that want to check those out. Thank you very much for your time. I will talk to you on the other side of this musical exit.
Great. Thank you so much for having me.
Yep. Thank you.